Chuck Schumer just begged the courts to stop Trump, not with a policy, but with a plea. This was not strategy, this was panic. What happened next stunned everyone. The spotlight hung low over the table. No music, no movement, just silence so heavy it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The host leaned forward, his voice calm but cold. Tonight, Chuck Schumer made a plea that might go down in history, not as a moment of leadership, but as a last-ditch cry from a collapsing political tower. The screen behind him flickered to life. A clip rolled. Schumer stood at a podium, late at night, sweat on his brow, papers shaking slightly. "If the courts do not step in now," he said, his voice tight with urgency, "it might be too late for our democracy. We cannot allow Trump to manipulate the system again." He paused, then added, "I am asking, no, I am urging, the judiciary to act before this goes too far." The room fell still again. Mark Levin sat still for a moment, then leaned forward. The clip had just ended, but the silence in the studio made it feel like it was still playing. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "This is not a plea for justice," he said. "It is a demand to shut down an opponent, plain and simple." He turned slightly toward the camera, eyes locked in. "When a Senate leader begs the courts to remove a rival from the ballot," he continued, "that is not oversight, that is tyranny, with a press badge." He paused, then let the next line hang. "It is one thing to have concerns, it is another to say, like Schumer just did, we urge the courts to act now before it is too late. Trump's campaign must be halted for the sake of our democracy. That is not legal commentary, that is pressure." Levin tapped the table once. "And let us not forget, this is happening just months before a national election. This is not a debate, this is panic." He leaned back but kept his eyes forward. "This is not about protecting the system, this is about controlling the outcome. And if people in power can do that without consequence, then the law no longer protects the people. It protects the powerful." Professor Alan Dershowitz sat still for a moment, hands folded, eyes low. Then, with a calm voice and steady pace, he began. "What we are witnessing is not criminal, not yet, but it is something else. It is unconstitutional pressure on the judiciary." He paused, letting the words settle. "In a healthy democracy, the courts are not weapons, they are walls. Walls meant to separate law from power, and judges from politics. What Senator Schumer did tonight, that pushes against that wall." He leaned slightly forward. "The Constitution outlines clear separation between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. That line is there to keep personal motives from infecting legal decisions. When a top senator says, 'We urge the courts to act now to stop Trump's campaign,' that is not concern. That is a request for action. And when it comes from someone with power over judicial appointments, it carries weight." He nodded once, slowly. "There is a reason we have rules, both written and unwritten, around judicial independence. The Federal Code of Conduct for Judges clearly warns against even the appearance of political influence. And in the 2009 case of Andrews v. United States, the court ruled that public comments meant to sway judicial behavior, especially near elections, can create grounds for appeal." He looked directly at the camera. "This may not be a crime in the way the public understands crime. But it is pressure. And pressure from above, especially when it leans on the courts, is dangerous. Because the moment judges feel pushed instead of guided, justice begins to bend." The screen lit up again, this time showing footage from a crowded rally just days earlier. Senator Schumer stood before a sea of cameras, his voice louder, more forceful than usual. His hand cut through the air as he declared, "We need the courts to act now, not later, to prevent Trump from using the system to shield himself." The crowd roared, but inside the studio, not a sound followed. No reaction. No shift in posture. Just stillness. The host leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the monitor. His voice dropped to a whisper. "He is not asking, he is telling." The silence felt heavier after that. Earlier that week, a federal judge had tossed out a case involving classified documents, one that had been pushed heavily by the opposition. The ruling was seen as a win for Trump's defense team. Schumer's rally speech came just hours later. Now, watching it back in this setting, the message hit differently. He was not warning. He was demanding action, from the courts, no less. And in that demand, he crossed a line not many dared to speak about. Mark Levin leaned in again, his tone now sharper than before. His words carried no anger, just focus, like someone pointing to a fire others refuse to see. "This is no longer an appeal to law," he said slowly. "It is a political SOS sent through a courtroom." He looked toward the host, then back at the camera. "Think about the message this sends. If one party can stand on a stage and tell judges what they should do in order to protect democracy, what stops the next party from doing the same? What stops any senator from calling for rulings based on political fear instead of legal grounds?" Levin paused, then continued with purpose. "In 2016, we saw something similar. After a controversial immigration ruling in the case Mendez v. U.S., leaked emails showed Democratic aides directly pressuring judges through back channels. The case was quietly dropped after that, but the damage stuck. Legal scholars called it a moment of judicial embarrassment, and now, it is happening again. But this time, it is public." Professor Dershowitz sat upright, his expression firm. "Yes, it is dangerous," he said. "But we must tread carefully. There is a difference between influence and coercion. If we start labeling emotional language as criminal pressure, we lose the ability to speak freely in moments of national stress." Levin shook his head. "Alan, this is not stress. It is strategy," Dershowitz replied gently but firmly. "And even strategy, if it is only words, cannot be treated like a crime. Courts should not obey fear, but we must be sure before we say the law was broken. Because once we cross that line, we do not get to walk it back." The host sat still, his fingers lightly pressed together, elbows resting on the edge of the desk. He looked from one guest to the other, then spoke with a calm that felt more like pressure than peace. "Do Senator Schumer's words today constitute unlawful interference with the judicial process?" Mark Levin answered without pause. "Yes," he said. "Under Title 18, Section 1503 of the U.S. Code, it is illegal to influence or intimidate a judge in the course of their duties. It does not matter if the influence is direct or implied. It matters that it exists." He leaned slightly forward. "In United States v. Aguilar, the Supreme Court made it clear, any statement that could be seen as trying to shape the outcome of a case is serious. And here we have the Senate Majority Leader, in public, asking the courts to act now against a political opponent." Levin's voice dropped. "If Trump had said it, they would have already filed charges." The host turned to Professor Dershowitz, who took a breath before answering. "Legally, there are grounds to investigate. I agree. The language was strong, and it came from someone in power. That always raises concern. But we must be careful. This was a speech, not a secret order. Rushing to call it unlawful could backfire." He paused, then added, "Sometimes the danger is not just in what is said, but in how we respond to it." Silence followed, long, heavy, and filled with more meaning than any of the words that came before it. Mark Levin leaned forward, his eyes sharp, voice rising, not in volume, but in heat. "This is not about Trump anymore. It is about the system cracking from within." He paused, letting the weight of those words fill the room. "When a leader cries, 'Save us,' but the solution they demand is to silence the ballot box, that is not a plea. It is the start of a coup dressed in panic." He turned toward the camera, unblinking. "This week, in Morrison v. State Board, a judge reversed a local election result that had favored Trump-backed candidates, after Schumer publicly warned that far-right victories could break democracy itself. That ruling, based on weak claims of misinformation, is now being cited nationwide as justification to review more outcomes. This is not coincidence. This is coordination." Levin's voice grew steadier. "If this becomes the model, leaders making emotional calls, judges responding under pressure, rulings shaped by fear instead of law, then the damage is no longer theoretical. It is happening. It is now." Professor Dershowitz nodded slowly, then spoke in a lower, careful tone. "I hear you, Mark, and I share the concern. But panic is not a crime. Fear drives people to say things they may not fully understand. That does not excuse it, but it makes the reaction just as dangerous as the words." He looked toward the host. "However, if judges begin to act on that fear, if they treat emotional speeches as signals, then yes, we are in darker waters. Because what makes our system work is not the power of one branch, it is the balance between all of them." Both men sat silent, nothing left to say. Just two voices, drawing a line through the middle of a system trying not to collapse under its own weight. The host sat still, eyes locked on the camera, his voice steady but low. A democracy cannot function when its leaders beg judges to do what voters may not. He paused, then looked down at the printed quote in front of him, bold, underlined, marked with a red pen. If the public will not stop Trump at the polls, then we may need the courts to do what the public won't. Chuck Schumer, 2 nights ago. The host looked back up, his voice now quieter, but every word clear. You just witnessed a man pleading with the law to stop an election, and the scariest part, he may truly believe he is saving the republic. He let the silence breathe, then added, but belief is not law, fear is not justice. And power, when used to shift the outcome of an election, no matter how well it is framed, is not leadership, it is control. He did not blink, did not move, he just sat there, the screen fading slowly to black.